I'm actually in my office at UTSA this time, so it's a nice change of scenery for everybody, I'm sure. Today I'm going to go over generalized anxiety disorder. That is one of them, or I'm going to go over the anxiety disorders in the DSM. So let's go ahead and get to it. So, let me go back a slide. Oh my goodness, what's happening here? Anxiety disorders. So what are we going to go over today? We're going to cover what is anxiety, separation anxiety, selective mutism, phobias, social anxiety, panic attacks and panic disorder, agoraphobia, and generalized anxiety disorder. So about anxiety. Anxiety is really interesting in the sense that it is both a diagnosis, and they have a set of diagnoses, and it's also a symptom of almost all the other mental disorders. And so it is very common. It's easy to misdiagnose anxiety disorders when really the anxiety your client is experiencing is a function of some other diagnosis. And so many things cause anxiety: grad school, work, recording videos for your classes. And so what I really caution you is to take your time and ask about the context and the situation that your client is in. For example, if someone is facing layoffs at work, their anxiety is probably going to be quite high. If they're worried about the health of a family member or an impending divorce or something, or they're going to be a new parent, then anxiety is going to be very high. That doesn't quite mean that they need the diagnosis, though. It's situational, right? So definitely ask about what else is going on in your client's life, and that can help prevent overdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. But what exactly is anxiety? And so anxiety is rooted in fear. It is a fear of something going wrong, something going horribly, catastrophically wrong. And all of the disorders that we're going to cover have an element of fear in them, right? So when you're working with a client, a lot of times you are trying to figure out, what are you worried about? And sometimes your client will know specifically, such as in the case of a phobia. Other times it might be more ambiguous. I don't know. I just feel like I'm going to mess up, right? Or I'm afraid of making a bad decision, right? So you're going to have to talk quite a bit with them, and you're probably going to spend some time pointing out cognitive distortions, stinking thinking, things like that, to help alleviate some of that fear. And as the fear alleviates, so would the symptoms. So let's start with separation anxiety, and I'm just going in order of the DSM. So if you have that out, great, you can make notes. We're just going to go in order. I tried to reduce the amount of back and forth. So two things with separation anxiety, and I'm sure everybody has heard of this one. It is developmentally inappropriate and excessive fear. So what does this mean? What do we need to think about? Well, we need to think about the development of our client, right? So a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, up to 6, I'll say, we would expect them to have really strong attachment, not wanting to be alone. And so you need to consider development versus someone who is older, such as a teen or an adult. So you need to take into account the person's age and developmental stage. And excessive, right? Being separated from someone, depending on the context, having anxiety over that might be appropriate, right? So taking your child to a new place, taking them to an amusement park, an airport, a mall, wherever, and you get separated, I would expect them to maybe get really scared that they can't find you versus you're in another room, right? So it's excessive to the situation. So from the DSM, you need 3 or more of these 8 symptoms that are pervasive over the last 4 weeks, right? Excessive distress when anticipating or experiencing separation, right? So this anticipation aspect of it, that alone is it's not sufficient to make the diagnosis. But I would say that someone being scared by the mere idea of being separated is a bit much. right? From home or from major attachment figures. Persistent and excessive worry about losing major attachment figures or harm to them, such as illness, injury, disasters, or death. And again, the context, a child worried about a terminally ill parent or someone who is worried about a terminally ill sibling or whomever, right? Again, the context matters. Excessive worry about experiencing an untoward event, right? So I'm going to be kidnapped, I'm going to get into an accident, I'm going to get sick, something terrible is going to happen. Reluctance or refusal to go out, away from home, to school, to work, or elsewhere. Well, not going to school, I don't know about all of you, but I never really wanted to go to school, which is ironic, as my parents often point out that I wound up going to all the school that one could go to. But children don't want to go to school. In this case, the reaction, though, would be very, very large. Tantrums, getting wound up to the point where they make themselves sick, right? Not on purpose. They're not malingering or trying to induce. But the way kids do, they get themselves all worked up, they throw up, right? They turn red. It almost looks like a phobia. And that's what gets mistaken, is that people will then think, what's going on at the school, that my child doesn't want to go, when really it's they don't want to be separated. Going away from home for little ones, this is somewhat normal. So think about maybe even the first time you spent the night at a friend's house, right? A lot of people, it's common to want to go home. Like they stay late and then they start maybe getting uncomfortable and they want the comforts of home, or they want their parents and things like that. In this case, though, children don't want to go to their friend's house. They don't want to go to the birthday party. Unless the other person is there, unless the parent is there. So this is a good indication that they don't even want to be alone with their own friends, right? Is a fairly big indicator, because we would expect children to at some point become more comfortable going with their friends' parents, and being away from mom and dad. But here this would be calling a lot. Let me call every hour. I want to go home. I want to go home. And it would be with everybody, right? Not just because it happens once doesn't make the diagnosis. Fear of being alone. Reluctance or refusal to sleep away from home, to go to sleep without the major attachment figure, so not sleeping in your own room. Nightmares involving the theme of separation, which that would be, not to be all Freudian about that, but if a child kept having recurrent nightmares of the same thing, that says a lot, doesn't it? And then the physical symptoms, like I was saying earlier, they're so wound up, they're so amped up that they're making themselves sick. So this can take some time to treat separation anxiety, but the idea is, what is the fear? If you feel compelled, asking where does that fear come from, and then looking at ways to alleviate that fear of being away. And you can probably imagine there's going to be a little bit of desensitization with this, right? Getting used to being away from the major attachment figure a little bit at a time until they grow more comfortable. But part of it is reinstilling the idea that the major attachment figure is going to be safe and sound, you're going to be safe and sound, and that the two of you will be united again. Selective mutism. So this is new to the anxiety section. This used to be in a section on childhood disorders, and again, we do see this primarily in children, and this is a failure to speak in specific social situations where it's expected. And so here, again, we need to consider a couple things. Age and stage, culture, right? What if the expected language is not their native language or their first language? And the context, right? So it's normal for kids, like when they go to school for the first time, to maybe not talk as much because they're scared or they're shy. The fear in this situation is fear of something bad is going to happen. So this is one of the more ambiguous ones, right? I doubt children are really afraid of saying the wrong thing, but they might fear, if I do this, then I'll get in trouble, I'll be made fun of, or just, I don't want the attention on me. It interferes with education or occupational achievement, social communication. And again, these kids would probably be talking to their attachment figures. They'd probably be talking to mom and dad and their siblings. And at home, if you're a fly on the wall, everything seems fine. But when they go to school, they go to a friend's house, it's kind of like they clam up. They can speak. We have ruled out that this is a language issue, right? So it's not, they're from, their native language is different. This is not a communication disorder such as stuttering or speech sound disorder, right? They can speak and they do know the language. They are electing not to speak. And it lasts for 1 month, not including that first month of school where there might be some nervousness and shyness. Phobias. For selective mutism, to work through this, it would be building up tolerance for the situation, and just like separation anxiety, reinstilling the idea that you're going to be okay, and what is this fear about, where did it come from, and identifying cognitive distortions and trying to alleviate fear and reinstill confidence. With specific phobias, and everybody here has heard of phobias, right? So this is an unwarranted fear of specific objects or situations, right? So, unwarranted fear. Like if you were face to face with a bear, then freak out, right? That's a bad time. If you are looking at a picture of a bear and you have that same reaction, that might be a phobia. And it's something specific, right? Blood, animals, height, closed spaces, spiders, etc. And the fear is out of proportion to the situation and context, right? So if, in Texas, it's summer, there are snakes, right? If I saw a snake, like I'm out playing with my kids and I saw one, I'd probably freak out a little bit, like, let's get out of here. And be kind of nervous to go outside or let my pets outside and things like that. Again, if I was just watching TV and on Nat Geo or something, they had a picture of a snake and I had the same reaction, right? That's out of proportion to the situation, right? So fear is normal, and there are things that we should be afraid of, right? Like we tell kids not to talk to strangers, not to go into the dark, to be careful of this or that, right? There is stuff that you should be aware of, but is your fear manageable, or is it interfering with your life, and is it in proportion to the situation at hand? And the phobias typically develop after a traumatic event. And this is the really interesting thing. It can be because they had a really bad interaction. So someone who maybe was attacked by a dog as a child might develop a phobia of dogs. Someone could have witnessed a really bad act of violence or been in an accident where they heard a dog barking a lot and associates that trauma with the dog, and now they have a phobia of dogs, right? It does not always have to be, that's not a criterion that will, have you ever been attacked by a dog? If the answer is no, it can still be a phobia. They just have maybe somehow developed this fear, and that's what we need to work on. Social anxiety is, and they show it in the DSM, social phobia is a really intense level of fear of social interaction. And so lots of people, kind of like when people say I'm so ADHD or I have OCD, this is another one. I have social anxiety, when really what maybe they're expressing is I have discomfort around social situations, or I feel like I don't fit in. Social anxiety, we're referring to a really intense reaction to being in a social setting. And this person might avoid social situations, including work. So this is one of the ways it can interfere, right? So this would be like me, when I have to go to a faculty meeting, and if I have social anxiety, I might avoid going to those faculty meetings where I'm expected to interact with my peers, but that's going to get me in trouble. I can't avoid doing this. Or even being a faculty member and I have classes where I'm going to have to talk to people and things like that, and I'm so nervous that I avoid doing it, and then I wind up getting into trouble. The fear here is around essentially negative evaluation. I'm going to do something that offends somebody, that makes me an outcast. I'm going to get kicked out of the group. I'm going to embarrass myself. In fact, it becomes kind of a recursive problem, right? Where I'm afraid of the negative evaluation of my shame, and then I get embarrassed, and that does lead here, and we go around and around and around. It might be that I start sweating, or I start breathing heavy, I turn red, and though I'm afraid that's going to happen, and then it happens, and then I'm afraid people notice, and then it gets worse, and it keeps going around and around and around, right? So it's not just I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, it's that people are going to notice how uncomfortable I am, and maybe I'm going to get teased. We specify if it's performance only, so this is where you would diagnose performance anxiety, because maybe you have someone, a musician, or a child who's in band, and they are social, they have friends, they interact with their family fine, they interact at school fine, but then when they're up on stage, it's a debilitating performance, and again, it's out of proportion. Having nerves when you're on stage or in a spotlight is to be expected, that's normal. When it's to the point where I can't perform or perform well, and it's kind of a night and day difference, we might be dealing with performance anxiety. But the key component for this, for social anxiety, is negative evaluation, not just I don't like people or I don't like making small talk. This is I have an intense fear of negative evaluation. And to kind of help make that distinction more, let's look at the difference between social anxiety and social awkwardness. Anxiety, or social anxiety, fear is everywhere, and I'm afraid I'm going to offend you. Like, I'm either afraid that I'm going to say something that I shouldn't. So sort of that situation where it's don't say this, don't say this, don't say this, and then it comes out. Or fear that you might hear me the wrong way. I say something and you thought I said something else. Fear of embarrassment. I'm afraid I'm going to wet myself. I'm afraid I'm going to sweat. I'm afraid that my shirt is going to come untucked. I'm afraid of rejection. And I have physiological reactions, which in turn, I'm also embarrassed by, right? So I'm afraid, and it can be real or imagined. I really do start sweating. I really do start breathing heavy. I really do turn red. Or I'm just afraid that's going to happen, right? And then I become embarrassed. Social awkwardness would be, I don't feel like I fit in, or maybe I really don't fit in. Saying the wrong thing, right? Trying to start a conversation when, conversation's already happening. Not overly concerned about others, and there's some discomfort, but there's not this debilitating fear that we see with social anxiety. Panic attacks. This is the only part where I think I bounce back and forth. So I think next in the DSM is panic disorder, and I'm kind of skipping ahead to panic attack. So this is one of those, confusing isn't quite the right word, but I guess it's a little confusing. There's panic attack and there's panic disorder. Panic attack, which is what we're looking at now, is, you all have heard of a panic attack, where you have this abrupt surge of intense fear or discomfort that comes up quickly and then kind of fades away. And the person has 4 or more of the following 13. Palpitations, pounding heart, sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, feelings of choking, chest pain, discomfort, nauseousness, feeling dizzy, lightheaded, chills or heat sensation, numbness or tingling, derealization or depersonalization, fear of losing control or going crazy, and fear of dying. So panic attacks you typically will not misdiagnose, right? These are intense. Your client knows something is wrong. They feel like they are dying. But panic attack like ADHD, OCD, gets thrown around. And many times I have clients who come in who say, I've had an anxiety attack or a panic attack. And I ask, right, because you should follow up, like, tell me about that. And really what they're describing is a really intense moment of anxiety, like, oh, did I leave the door unlocked, or did I lock my keys in the car, or I found out the quiz was today and I had a panic attack. And what they mean is they got really nervous, really anxious, versus a panic attack the way we mean it in the DSM, where it's I can't breathe, the walls are closing in, I'm sweating, my chest hurts, I can't catch my breath, right? So it's an important distinction that when a client comes in and says, I've had a panic attack, or I about had a panic attack, to at least follow up and see, do they mean this panic attack, or do they mean it was a really intense moment? And really the distinction is because we want to work on the right thing. So panic attack by itself is a specifier, right? So if a person has a panic attack, that is, they have 4 of these, then we would say it's panic attack with, right? It should be noted, again, better at those straight lines, should be noted as a specifier, right? If someone just has a panic attack by itself, right, we don't diagnose they have panic attacks. It's got to be panic attacks with something else, or something else with panic attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder with panic attacks, anorexia nervosa with panic attacks, right? Panic attack alone is not a mental disorder. So, in other words, if you are working with someone and they have bipolar 1 disorder, and then they describe having this, you can say bipolar 1 disorder with panic attacks. Panic disorder is the panic attack, right? All the symptoms we just went over, followed by 1 month or more of one or both of the following: worry about additional panic attacks or their consequences, or maladaptive change in behavior. So panic attack by itself just is the attack. The disorder is I have panic attack and I'm worried about having more, so much so that I have stopped leaving my house, I have given up hobbies, I left my job, right? But I'm so scared of having another panic attack, versus there are individuals who have it happened and they move forward and they might say, boy, that sucked, I hope it never happens again, and that's it. Panic disorder is I can't leave the house because what if I have a panic disorder? I can't go grocery shopping right now. What if I have an attack and I'm stuck in traffic? I can't go to my child's parent-teacher conference because I would be so embarrassed if I had a panic attack in front of my kid's teacher. So again, to distinguish the two, panic attack is a specifier. You attach it to anything except panic disorder, right? Panic disorder already contains having a panic attack, so you do not need to say panic disorder with panic attacks. You just say panic disorder. When they have anything else, though, you would say, binge eating disorder with panic attack, substance use disorder with panic attack. And it lacks that consistent fear of future panic attacks. So they have them, but they're not, beyond saying this is uncomfortable and I hope it doesn't happen again, they're not really losing sleep over it. Panic disorder already has in it panic attacks, and it also needs a month of worrying about having a future panic attack. Now, panic attacks, they can definitely be treated. Mindfulness and mindfulness-based breathing and stress reduction helps. So a lot of time with panic attacks and panic disorder, what we're helping the person identify is, are there specific things that trigger it, such as, if you have a phobia and you have a phobia of dogs, you see a loose dog on the street, that might trigger it, how to manage that. If they're unexpected, which can happen, meaning they just they're as likely to happen now as they are 10 minutes from now, as they are tomorrow or the day after, then what does it feel like for your body, so they can start identifying what it feels like. And many times it takes a little bit, because for them, the client, it feels like it just happens. It just comes up out of nowhere. And that's why the mindfulness piece is so productive and so important. It is to slow down and do the mindfulness-based breathing and say, what's going on? Well, I noticed that I get this itch in my throat, and then I start thinking about my throat a whole lot, and I start sweating, and I think about the sweating, and then I start watching, I start feeling my chest go up and down, and then the panic attack happens. So we need to kind of slow everything down. And as they get familiar with what it feels like to have the panic attack before it happens, like the stuff that leads up to it, then they can say, I went and I splashed water on my face. I went for a walk. I spoke to my partner. I journaled. I did whatever to kind of help reduce the likelihood of a panic attack occurring. Agoraphobia, which typically occurs as a result of panic attacks, is a marked fear about leaving the confines of one's home or a controlled situation. So here there's anxiety for two or more of the following situations: using public transportation, being in open spaces, being in enclosed spaces, standing in line or being in a crowd, or being outside of the home alone. And really what the fear is that something terrible is going to happen, and I am not going to be safe. So if they do go out, and they can go out, so again, it's not, they go out with their, they go out with their mom, or they go out with their sibling or a friend, so I guess it's not agoraphobia. It's that they need to have that person, right? They won't go out without that person. They're afraid that something is going to happen to them. I'm afraid if I get in the car, I'll get in a car accident. I'm afraid if I go to the grocery store, I'll have a panic attack. I'm afraid if I go to the library, I'll have a heart attack. And so if I stay home, I'll be safe. I'll be safe from all the dangers of the world. I won't have a panic attack because I don't have panic attacks in my home. I know where the phone is. I can call 911. And the fear is out of proportion to the actual threat, because there are maybe reasons. There, if somebody has a medical condition where maybe they're incontinent or something like that, or they do have mobility issues and they are afraid of tripping and falling, right? The fear that the person feels is out of proportion to that, right? So they might say, let me take all these precautions and I need to hurry, or today's not a good day, versus I absolutely can't ever go out because it'll be the end of me. And again, we do see this following panic attacks, mostly because the person is afraid. What if I have another panic attack? It's going to be really embarrassing. Or what if I'm driving and it happens? What if I'm on a plane and it happens? Right? And so I don't want to do that. What if there's nobody to come help me? And now we're at generalized anxiety disorder, which is going to sound like it's speaking to us specifically. So excessive anxiety and worry occurring more days than not for at least 6 months. Isn't that neat? Occurring more days than not, right? So it's not like there's a hard number, but just more often the person worries a lot about a number of different events, right? So it's not one thing. When a person's worried about one thing, then they're worried about that one thing. They're worried about that exam. They're worried about their bills. They're worried about the test results. They're worried about whatever. And that can be anxiety provoking, and it warrants its own counseling and addressing it and everything, but it doesn't make it generalized anxiety. The individual finds it difficult to control the worry, and you have 3 or more of the following: restlessness or feeling keyed up, on edge, easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, and sleep disturbance in any direction, like staying awake, falling asleep, things like that, not resting really well. So it's easy to misdiagnose because people come in, and usually when people come in to see you, especially the first time, they're kind of, they're jazzed up. They're bothered by something enough to come to counseling. They made the appointment. It's their first time. They seem a little nervous. But we need to make sure that the anxiety isn't focused on just one aspect, such as school. I'm afraid I'm going to get kicked out of school. I'm afraid I'm going to fail this assignment. What if I don't get into such and such class or school? At work, I'm afraid I'm going to get fired. They're doing layoffs. I really want this promotion. Family problems, relationship problems, right? I think we're breaking up. All these different things cause anxiety, but it's not generalized. That's situationally bound, right? Now, that can be problematic and uncomfortable. I'm not suggesting, well, then don't worry about it. It means focus on that and not generalized anxiety disorder, where you would focus on maybe the cognitive distortions, the stinking thinking, the mindfulness, things like that. With generalized anxiety, they're worried about several different things. In fact, let's look at our DSM on page 222, 223. Several features distinguish generalized anxiety from non-pathological anxiety, because anxiety is a part of life. That's just the way it goes, right? Worries associated with generalized anxiety disorder are excessive and typically interfere significantly with psychosocial functioning, right? So you have a lot of worries and they're excessive, meaning it's all of the time and out of proportion, right? I'm going to fail this test and my life is over. The worries of everyday life are not excessive and are more manageable and may be put off when more pressing matters arise. So you're able to prioritize. Second, the worries associated with generalized anxiety disorder are more pervasive, pronounced, and distressing, longer in duration, and frequently occur without precipitants. So you have no need to worry about something, and yet you're worried about it. The greater range of life circumstances about which a person worries, the more likely his or her symptoms are to meet criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. So if the person is worried, again, about one or two things, that's one thing. If they're worried about every aspect of their life, then it might be generalized anxiety disorder. And so mindfulness-based training can help with that. Sometimes medication is needed to turn down that anxious noise that the person hears all the time. But the best outcomes are with counseling and medication. So this is something that is absolutely manageable. It just takes time to retrain the way a person thinks, right? As they kind of learn, maybe I'm catastrophizing, maybe this is black and white thinking, and so on. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions or overgeneralizing, discounting the good, right? All those different things can contribute to generalized anxiety. So very, very, very treatable. That's going to do it for this one. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye. What? No. Oh.